What if I told you that the greatest hero in history began as a victim, Hercules? The name echoes across centuries as a symbol of strength, power, immortality. But behind the legend lies a far darker truth. He was not chosen. He was a target, marked before he was even born, used by the gods, feared by men, and dragged through crimes he never chose to commit. He was born with the blood of Zeus, but it did not save him. It condemned him. This is not the story of a triumphant hero. It is the story of a man forged in betrayal, madness, and divine vengeance. A man forced to defeat monsters so he would not be consumed by the monster within. Everything began with a lie and the desire of a god. Alcmene was a mortal woman, granddaughter of Perseus, and the faithful wife of the general Amphitryon. But her beauty did not go unnoticed by the gods of Olympus. Zeus, obsessed, descended from the heavens disguised as Amphitryon himself. To prolong his deception and spend more time with Alcmene, he ordered the sun not to rise for 3 days, creating an unnaturally long night. When the real Amphitryon returned from war, he found his wife pregnant. Filled with jealousy and confusion, he confronted her. But Zeus intervened and revealed the truth. The child was his. Amphitryon yielded. He was not a betrayed husband. He was the stepfather of the son of the king of the gods. He accepted the child, recognizing that he was no ordinary mortal. That very same night, Alcmene had also conceived a second child with her true husband. Thus, 2 twins would be born, one mortal, Iphicles, and the other a demigod, Hercules. But not everyone was willing to forgive. Hera, the wife of Zeus, was not known for her compassion. And this time, her fury was silent, but relentless. She could not murder her husband's son without provoking the wrath of Olympus, but she could twist his destiny from the shadows. First, she altered the course of time. She magically delayed the birth of Hercules, ensuring that Eurystheus, another descendant of Perseus, would be born first. A simple shift of hours that cost him his kingdom. Then she carried her hatred to the cradle. In the middle of the night, she released 2 venomous serpents beside the twins' bed, a punishment disguised as an accident. But destiny does not always obey. Hercules, still without words, awoke, and with his tiny hands strangled the creatures before the terrified eyes of his mother. It was not a miracle, it was a warning. That was his first crime, surviving. From childhood, Hercules was different from the others. His strength was so overwhelming that even he did not fully understand it. One day, while training with his music teacher, he struck him with a lyre for correcting him and killed him instantly. It was not cruelty, it was instinct, an uncontrollable reflex. While other children were learning manners, he was learning not to destroy whatever he touched. He was sent to train with the best teachers in Greece: wrestling, archery, horsemanship, but none was more important than the centaur Chiron, wisest among the wise, who tried to teach him not only how to fight, but how to think before acting. Even so, no one could truly teach him restraint. His body responded like that of a god. His temper was that of a cornered animal. He grew tall and imposing, with a gaze that commanded respect and a reputation that arrived before he did. But he also carried a constant fear, the fear of himself, because it was not only strength, it was strength without control, and the world still did not know what that truly meant. In time, Hercules found something close to peace. He married Megara, princess of Thebes. They had children, a family, a purpose. And for a moment he believed he had defeated his own destiny. But the gods do not forget, and Hera even less. One day, without warning, his mind shattered. The fury of the goddess fell upon him like an invisible cloud. He saw no faces, he heard no pleas. He only felt enemies all around him. When he regained his senses, a painful silence surrounded him. Before him lay the lifeless bodies of his own children, and Megara's, her arms still outstretched as if she had tried to protect them. There was no trial, no defense, only a void impossible to fill. He tried to take his own life, But his cousin Theseus stopped him. He spoke to him of redemption, of a way to atone for the unforgivable. Desperate to find meaning in the horror, Hercules went to the oracle of Delphi. The answer was as cruel as it was necessary. Go to King Eurystheus, obey him, carry out his orders, one after another. Only then, perhaps, will you heal what you have broken. And so began the most brutal penance a man had ever faced. 12 labors, 12 impossible trials. A sentence disguised as a path. Hercules arrived before King Eurystheus as a broken man, searching for redemption. But the king did not see penance. He saw an opportunity to get rid of him. He assigned him 12 tasks, all impossible, all deadly. The first, to kill the Nemean Lion. A creature that was more than an animal, it was an aberration sent by the gods. Colossal in size, with a mane dark as night and eyes that shone with savage intelligence. Its hide was so thick that no human weapon could pierce it. Hercules set out for Nemea alone. Along the way, he questioned shepherds, tracked footprints through the valleys, and listened to the stories of those who had lost livestock or family members. Each story was worse than the last, and all of them ended the same way. No one returned from the cave. When he finally reached the lion's territory, the silence was absolute. Birds did not sing. The air felt heavy. The monster's lair was hidden among rocky crags, surrounded by bones and a suffocating stench. Hercules positioned himself before the entrance and waited. When the lion appeared, he fired an arrow straight into its chest. Nothing. Then with his sword, and each attempt bounced off as if striking marble. So he devised a plan, blocked one of the cave's 2 exits. That way, he would force the lion to remain inside, where it could neither escape nor attack him in the open. With enormous rocks, he sealed the rear opening of the tunnel. And when night fell, he entered through the front, carrying a burning torch. The interior was a deadly trap. Dark, narrow, with no room to maneuver. But there, Hercules did the unthinkable. He threw aside the torch and hurled himself at the beast with his bare hands. For hours, they struggled in brutal combat. The lion tried to tear him apart, but Hercules clung to its neck, fighting to breathe, refusing to yield. They rolled across the ground like 2 primal forces colliding within a single body. Until finally, with one last roar, the lion fell. But even in death, its hide remained impenetrable. That was when the hero learned his first lesson: adaptation. He used the lion's own claws to tear off its skin, and with it, he fashioned an armor. He had not only defeated the monster, he had learned to think like one. When he returned with the lion's skin to the walls of Mycenae, Eurystheus looked at him in horror, not because of the animal, but because of the man who had managed to kill it with his bare hands. From that day on, Eurystheus began to fear him, and although he still demanded that Hercules present himself before him, each time he received him with greater suspicion and greater fear. The second labor was feared even more than the first. In the swamps of Lerna, in southern Greece, lived a creature born of nightmares. The Hydra, a monster with 9 venomous heads and the body of a giant serpent. Each time one of its heads was cut off, 2 more grew in its place. Hercules knew he could not face it alone. This time, he brought with him his nephew Iolaus. When they reached the marsh, the air was almost impossible to breathe. The water bubbled as if boiling from deep within the earth. The Hydra waited inside a submerged cave, among roots and poisonous vapors. Hercules lit a torch and began to provoke it. The creature burst forth with a shriek that shook the forest. Its heads writhed in every direction. The hero fought with sword and club, severing head after head. But every strike doubled the problem. Soon he was surrounded by new heads, more violent, more relentless. Then Iolaus lit dry branches and began to cauterize the freshly severed necks. Only this way could they stop the heads from growing back. One by one, the Hydra's screams grew fewer, until only the central head remained, immortal. Hercules tore it off with his own hands and buried it alive beneath a massive rock. Before leaving, he dipped his arrows in the monster's blood. A poison so deadly that not even the gods were immune to it. The second labor was finished. When he returned to Mycenae, still covered in mud and the fumes of the swamp, he showed Eurystheus the Hydra's head sealed beneath stone and the arrow soaked in its blood. The king stepped back in disgust. He did not want to touch anything, not even to look too closely. But he had no choice but to accept defeat. Though deep down, he wished the next task would be the last. The third labor seemed simple, but it was not. Hercules had to capture the Ceryneian Hind alive, a sacred animal of Artemis, goddess of the hunt. It had hooves of bronze, antlers of gold, and a speed impossible to match. To harm it would offend the gods. To kill it would be blasphemy. The hero set out for the mountains of Arcadia. There, among forests and rivers, the tracking began. For days he saw only a golden flash between the trees, always fleeting, always out of reach. The hind did not confront him, it avoided him. Weeks passed, the weather changed. The pursuit became a silent ritual. Slow steps, controlled breathing, faint tracks in the snow. Finally, one afternoon, he found it drinking water beside a stream. He did not attack. He did not shout. He simply drew his bow and released a precise arrow, not to kill, but to wound its leg slightly. The hind fell without a cry. Hercules ran to calm it, carefully wrapping its wound. He did not drag it. He carried it on his shoulders in silence, like someone bearing a sleeping god. And when Artemis appeared in his path, furious at what he had done, she demanded a reason for touching her sacred creature. Hercules did not kneel, nor did he lie. He spoke with honesty, that he had been sent by a king, that he had no choice, and that he had done everything possible not to harm it more than necessary. He said this was not a hunt but a trial, and that he acted not for glory, but for penance. Artemis watched him in silence, and seeing the care with which he had tended the wounded hind, she allowed him to continue on his way. Thus, the third labor was completed, without blood, without battle, only patience and respect. When he returned with the hind still alive upon his shoulders, Eurystheus did not know how to react. He had expected a dead beast, another trophy. Instead, what he received was a symbol of restraint, of mastery without violence. Although he accepted it as valid, something about it unsettled him. He was beginning to realize that not even his most subtle challenges could break the Son of Zeus. The fourth labor carried Hercules to the snow-covered mountains of Erymanthus. There dwelled a colossal wild boar, with tusks sharp as daggers and an uncontrollable fury. In winter, it descended to attack villages and devour crops, leaving death in its wake. The hero had to capture it alive. Killing it would not be enough. Eurystheus wanted to see it subdued, humiliated, a living trophy of his power over Hercules. Before confronting it, Hercules visited his old friend Pholus the centaur. They shared wine and stories, and, without meaning to, unleashed a tragedy. When they opened a jar of sacred wine that belonged to all the centaurs by ancestral right, the scent quickly spread through the forest. Soon other centaurs arrived, outraged by what they considered a theft. The argument turned violent. Hercules tried to hold them back, but the attacks were fierce. In the chaos, he used his arrows dipped in the blood of the Hydra. One by one, the centaurs fell. Among them, by tragic mistake, was Chiron, the wise and kind teacher, struck by an arrow while trying to stop the fight. Though immortal, the poison caused him unbearable pain that even the gods could not ease. Grief-stricken, Hercules left the camp behind and resumed the hunt. He followed deep tracks through the snow, fallen trees, broken branches, and the half-devoured remains of animals. The landscape itself felt like a warning. This beast was not only strong, it was relentless. On a narrow slope, While the wind whistled through the pines, the boar burst from the undergrowth with a deafening roar. It charged with brutal force, like an avalanche of tusks and muscle, forcing Hercules to dive aside to avoid being impaled. Hercules did not confront it immediately. He provoked it, exhausted it, driving it higher up the mountain. For hours he forced the beast to follow him toward the summit, where the snow was deeper. There the animal began to sink into the soft drifts, trapped without being able to advance or retreat. That was when the hero lunged forward, pinned it down with all his strength, bound it with chains, and dragged it down the mountain. When he arrived at Eurystheus's palace, covered in blood and mud, dragging the colossal boar alive behind him, the king hid inside a large jar, not out of respect, but out of fear. Fear of the creature, and even more, of the man who had defeated it. The fame of Hercules was beginning to grow, but so was his shadow. The fifth labor demanded not brute strength, but humiliation. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to clean the stables of King Augean. But it would not be only a public humiliation. He had to do it in a single day and without receiving any glory for it. When Augean heard of the challenge, he promised Hercules a reward if he managed to accomplish the impossible, but he did not believe he would succeed. Augean was a wealthy, arrogant king who owned thousands of heads of cattle. For decades, he had ignored the condition of his stables, allowing filth to accumulate until it formed walls of manure. The stench could be smelled for miles. No one dared to clean that place until Hercules arrived. But the task was not only disgusting, it was impossible. It had to be finished in a single day. Hercules surveyed the place carefully. He knew brute force would achieve nothing. Shovels sank into the rot, and the king's own servants did not even dare to enter. Then, observing the terrain in the nearby riverbeds, he devised a clever solution. He diverted the course of two great rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, digging channels with his own hands and guiding the water toward the entrance of the stables. The torrent burst in like a purifying avalanche. It swept away decades of filth, rotting remains, hardened mud, and waste accumulated over generations. When the waters receded, the stench had vanished. Where darkness and decay had once reigned, the clean stone floor now shone. The stables, once a symbol of neglect and decay, looked newly built. Even the king's own servants stared in disbelief, unable to recognize the place where they had worked all their lives. Augean, astonished, refused to pay the reward he had promised. He claimed the agreement required Hercules to clean the stables with his own hands, not by using rivers or clever tricks. He accused Hercules of using magic or divine deception, and dismissed him with contempt, as if ingenuity itself were a form of cheating. When Hercules returned with the news, Eurystheus smiled with cruelty. He declared the labor invalid, because the hero had received help from the rivers, and because, deep down, he could not bear to see him succeed. Thus, the fifth labor was completed, but not recognized, and the road to redemption only grew longer. The sixth labor led Hercules to the forests surrounding Lake Stymphalian in Arcadia. There dwelled a plague of monstrous birds, sacred to Ares, the god of war. They had beaks of bronze, wings sharp as blades, and feathers capable of piercing shields. They fed on human flesh and left no trace. The entire forest seemed deserted. No animals were heard, no footsteps, only the wind, and sometimes the hiss of feathers gliding above the treetops. Hercules tried to hunt them, but they were too many and flew too high. The trees were dense, the branches thick. He could not use his bow with precision. It was then that he received unexpected help. Athena, goddess of wisdom, appeared to him at dusk, wrapped in a soft mist the wind could not disperse. She spoke calmly, acknowledging that strength was not what was needed there, but ingenuity. She gave him a pair of bronze crotala forged by Hephaestus, instruments that produced a thunderous metallic noise capable of shaking the air and spreading chaos among the birds. "Not everything is conquered with weapons," she told him. "Sometimes you must know how to force the enemy out of its hiding place." Hercules accepted the crotala with reverence, as if Athena had entrusted him with a secret weapon of Olympus. For hours, he watched from the thicket, trying to imagine how to disturb creatures so elusive. Then he understood. If the sound was to spread, it had to rise above the forest. He climbed a nearby hill, a natural elevation from which he could overlook the trees. There at the summit, he shook the crotala with all his strength. The metallic crash echoed through the forest like a thunderclap, breaking the sacred silence of the place. The noise forced the birds to abandon their hiding places in a violent cloud, darkening the sky with their bladed wings. From above, Hercules released a precise rain of poisoned arrows, aiming at each silhouette diving toward him. The arrows pierced the bronze of their wings, embedding themselves with a sharp whistle. One by one, the creatures fell like stones into the lake. The few that escaped fled away from the sun and never returned. The lake returned to calm, the forest to silence. When Hercules returned to Mycenae, Eurystheus no longer mocked him. He had seen monsters captured and feats of strength, but this time something deeper unsettled him. How could anyone defeat an invisible enemy, one that only revealed itself when forced into the open? He only asked what would come next, his voice trembling, as if for the first time he understood that Hercules' mind could be as terrifying as his strength. The seventh labor took Hercules to the island of Crete. There dwelled a gigantic bull, sent by Poseidon. It had been a gift to King Minos, but the king refused to sacrifice it, unleashing the god's fury. The animal became unstoppable. It shattered fields, charged anyone who approached, and destroyed everything in its path. Hercules crossed the Augean Sea and arrived on the island alone, without help or guidance. He asked the farmers about the bull, followed scorched tracks in the earth where its passage had dragged dry branches and sparked fires. The peasants said that steam poured from its nostrils, and that its rage set the grass ablaze as it galloped. The monster was more than brute strength. Its gaze was maddened, and an energy surrounded it that seemed to make the air tremble. Hercules waited for it among the cliffs at dawn, when the sun painted the sea red and the wind roared like an omen. The bull emerged from the sea mist, its eyes burning, the ground trembling beneath its steps. It bellowed, and the earth seemed to answer. Hercules did not move. When the beast charged, he turned like a shadow, evading it with impossible precision. For several minutes, they circled among the rocks, strength against calculation, fury against discipline. The hero did not attack. He waited. And when the bull slipped for an instant upon loose stone, Hercules leapt onto its back like lightning, seized its horns with both hands and, with a roar that echoed through the cliffs, slammed it to the ground. The monster struggled, but it could no longer rise. He did not kill it. He left it alive, breathing with fury, but defeated. Bound with ropes and chains, he brought it to the ship. When he arrived in Mycenae with the bull alive behind him, the people stood in silence. Eurystheus stared at him in disbelief. And for the first time, he did not order the next labor. He simply walked away, as if he needed time to invent something worse. The eighth labor took Hercules north to Thrace, where Diomedes ruled, a cruel king, son of Ares, who fed his horses with human flesh. The beasts were enormous, savage, and driven by constant fury. They were chained with iron bridles and guarded day and night. No one who tried to approach them ever returned alive. Hercules arrived at the port in silence, this time accompanied by a small group of volunteers who had stepped forward after hearing the tales about the man-eating mares. They were not famous warriors, but farmers, sailors, and young men eager to prove their courage under the shadow of the hero. The stables were heavily guarded. Diomedes, afraid that someone might steal his sacred beasts, had posted soldiers in constant shifts, armed with spears and orders to kill anyone who approached. At night, when the group tried to slip between the walls and barracks, the Thracian soldiers detected them and launched a fierce defense. The attack was immediate and brutal. Hercules fought like a storm. He swung his club with ancestral fury, shattering bones and shields alike, while his battle cry made the walls tremble. The mares, smelling fresh blood, went mad and began thrashing against their chains, snapping the restraints one by one with deafening neighs. Then Diomedes appeared, not with fear, but with pride. He released the animals and unleashed them against the intruders. But Hercules did not retreat. He struck Diomedes down with his own hands and dragged him before the mares. Until then, they had only devoured slaves, prisoners, or the innocent. That time, for the first time, they devoured the man who had turned them into monsters, their own master. Feeding on the flesh that had corrupted them made them docile. Hercules bound them and led them out of the kingdom without violence. When he brought them to Eurystheus, the king looked at them with disgust. He ordered them to be released immediately into the fields of Hera. But everyone knew that wherever those mares walked, the land was left scarred. Even animals avoided those fields. Crops grew weak, and on moonless nights some swore they could hear neighing in the mist. The ninth labor led Hercules to the land of the Amazons, a kingdom of warrior women, isolated and feared by every man in Greece. Their queen, Hippolyta, wore a sacred belt given to her by Ares. It was not merely an ornament, but a symbol of command and respect among her people, and Eurystheus wanted it as a gift for his daughter. Hercules sailed to Themyscira with several warriors, but he knew this would not be won by force. The Amazons were not ordinary enemies. When he arrived, he asked for an audience with Hippolyta, and against all expectations, he was granted an audience. She did not receive him with hostility. On the contrary, she admired his deeds and offered him the belt as a sign of mutual respect. But from the shadows, someone else was watching. Hera, the goddess, furious to see that the labor might be completed without violence, disguised herself as an Amazon and spread the rumor that Hercules planned to kidnap the queen. The camp erupted with shouts, confusion, and spears flying through the mist. Hercules and his men suddenly found themselves surrounded. The Amazons attacked from every direction. In the midst of the battle, Hippolyta fell. When the sun rose, the hero held the belt in his hands, but there was no victory in his eyes. He had fulfilled the command. The belt was in his grasp, yet it felt heavy as lead. He knew he had not triumphed, only survived someone else's trap. The blood that had been spilled was not his choice, but the memory, he would carry it, because the betrayal had not been his. Eurystheus received the belt with a satisfied smile and asked nothing more. The 10th labor carried Hercules farther than ever before, to the far west, where the known world came to an end. There lived Geryon, a monstrous being with 3 bodies joined at the waist and a single soul. He owned a herd of red cattle, guarded by a giant herdsman and a 2-headed dog. The cattle were sacred, and Eurystheus wanted them all, driven back from the very edge of the world. To reach that place, Hercules crossed Libya, burning deserts, and lands no Greek had ever set foot on. The heat was so unbearable that, in a burst of fury, he raised his bow to the sky and shouted at the sun, accusing it of scorching mankind without mercy. Helios, astonished by the audacity of a mortal who dared challenge him, descended from the heavens wrapped in golden fire. But he did not punish him. Instead, he smiled, fascinated by his courage, and said, "Your determination is stronger than the desert. Take this golden cup. With it you will cross the sea as if you were walking upon it." Hercules accepted the gift with respect, without lowering his gaze. And with the cup, he sailed across the ocean until he reached the island of Erythea. There, hidden among dark rocks and salt-stained slopes, Hercules watched the movements of the herd for hours. The dog Orthrus patrolled the area with its 2 heads constantly alert, and Eurytion, the giant herdsman, never strayed far from the animals. Hercules waited for sunset. Then he descended silently from the rocks, using the wind to hide his scent. Orthrus sensed him at the last instant, but it was already too late. With a single precise blow of his club, Hercules crushed the 2-headed guardian. Eurytion, seeing his companion fall, ran to confront him. but his strength was no match for that of the Son of Zeus. He fell after a brief struggle, roaring the name of his master. Geryon did not take long to appear. 3 armored torsos, 3 swords, 3 shields, but one single heart and one single weakness. Hercules faced him in open combat, among black rocks in the salty wind. With a poisoned arrow, he pierced him straight through, bringing all 3 bodies down with a single shot. Then he drove the cattle for many months, crossing the entire continent on the return journey. Beasts, thieves, rivers, and armies tried to stop him. None succeeded. When he finally reached Mycenae, the herd was intact. And Eurystheus, for the first time, did not know what to say. The penultimate labor sent Hercules in search of the golden apples of the garden of the Hesperides. Sacred fruits, guarded by the nymphs of the western twilight and protected by an immortal dragon of 100 heads, Ladon. No one knew exactly where the garden lay. Some placed it beyond the ocean, others at the edges of the sky. Hercules traveled through unknown lands, questioned sages, fought beasts, and crossed deserts where even the air seemed to have no memory. He knew that to find the garden, he first had to find Nereus, the ancient sea god, the only being who knew its location. He searched the forgotten shores until he found him sleeping among the waves on a lonely beach. Without giving him a chance to flee, Hercules threw himself upon him with a bronze chain and held him tight, knowing the god's only defense was to transform. Nereus changed form again and again. He became a fish, a serpent, fire, even water itself. But Hercules did not release him. Only when the god, exhausted and with no escape left, returned to his original form did he agree to reveal the location of the garden. But the garden could not be taken by force. So he sought another way. On his journey at the margins of the world where the sky seemed to touch the earth, he found Atlas. The Titan stood motionless, his face hardened by centuries of burden. His back trembled beneath the weight of the heavens, yet his eyes still burned with an ancient fury. Hercules approached him with respect. He did not demand. He proposed. He spoke of the apples, of the garden, of a bargain that could benefit them both. The hero offered to take the sky upon his own shoulders to relieve the Titan for a time, if Atlas would bring back the fruits. For the first time in an eternity, Atlas smiled. The Titan accepted. For the first time in ages, he felt free. But when he returned with the apples, he tried to leave Hercules carrying the sky forever. The hero, however, answered with a clever ruse. He pretended to accept and asked Atlas to hold the sky for just a moment while he adjusted his cloak. Atlas agreed. And in that instant, Hercules took the apples and walked away. He had outwitted a Titan and obtained fruits that even the gods guarded jealously. When he returned to Mycenae, the apples shone as if they still carried the light of the eternal garden. Not even Eurystheus dared to touch them. He only looked at them from a distance, with a mixture of greed and fear, as if he knew that placing a single finger upon them might awaken the wrath of the gods. The final labor was not only the most difficult, it was the most feared of all. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades. He could not kill it, he could not wound it, only capture it and bring it back alive. Before departing, Hercules was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites that allowed mortals to walk through the realm of the dead without losing their sanity. Then he descended. He crossed the Tanarum Chasm, a sacred opening that marked the entrance to the underworld. As he passed through it, the air changed, dense, timeless, filled with whispers. He walked along rivers of shadows where souls drifted aimlessly, remembering their lives with grief or rage. He avoided the traps of the damned who stretched their hands toward him begging for relief, and he rejected the pleas of ghosts who mistook him for a god or a savior. In one of the stone chambers, he found Theseus, his old friend, trapped within a living rock as punishment for trying to abduct Persephone. Hercules freed him by tearing apart the chains of the underworld with a single pull, while Theseus watched him with a mixture of shame and gratitude. Further on, he stood before the dark throne of Hades and Persephone. He did not kneel, but neither did he challenge them. He spoke with respect. He asked permission to take the guardian of the underworld, only for a time. The gods listened, and they agreed. But they imposed a trial no mortal had ever survived. He had to subdue Cerberus with nothing but his own strength. No weapons, no tricks, no help. Only his hands against the creature of the abyss. Hercules accepted. He descended into the deepest darkness, where not even the light of the gods could reach. There awaited Cerberus, enormous, covered in black scales, with 3 smoking jaws and a gaze that froze the blood. The battle was brutal. Claws, fangs, roars. Hercules endured bites, slashes, and blows that would have shaken mountains. But he did not yield. He seized the monster by the central neck, or wrapped it in chains, and after a timeless struggle, he finally subdued the beast. With Cerberus chained across his back, he returned to the world of the living. When he appeared in Mycenae, the entire city fell silent. Eurystheus fled in terror, hiding behind the walls of his palace. The final labor was complete, and the underworld had obeyed a man. The 12 labors were finished, but peace did not come. Hercules had defeated beasts, gods, entire kingdoms, but he could not escape the memory. He tried to begin again. He married Deianira, a young princess who restored a small fragment of hope. But fate had not finished with him. During a journey, Hercules and Deianira reached the bank of a raging river. Nessus the centaur offered to help her cross the river, carrying her on his back, as was customary for travelers. But in the middle of the crossing, he changed his course and tried to flee with her along the opposite shore. Deianira screamed, and Hercules from the other side of the river did not hesitate. He took his bow and fired an arrow dipped in the blood of the Hydra. The arrow pierced Nessus's chest, and the centaur fell twisting in the sand. Before dying, Nessus deceived Deianira. He told her that his blood could ensure a man's loyalty. Sometime later, fearing she might lose Hercules' love, Deianira soaked a tunic in that blood and sent it to him as a gift. When Hercules put it on, the poison in the garment, awakened by the heat of his body, began to spread slowly across his skin. The blood of Nessus, mixed with the venom of the Hydra, acted like a corrosive acid. It burned the muscles from within, clung to the flesh, and could not be removed without tearing the skin away with it. There was no cure. There was no escape. The hero screamed. He begged. He tried to tear the flesh from his own body, and he understood that his story would not have a peaceful ending. Redemption, if it existed at all, would not be found in this world. The pain was unbearable. Neither monsters, nor the labors, nor even Hades himself had ever broken him like this. The cursed tunic clung to his body like molten lava against his skin. He tried to tear it off, but with every attempt the flesh came away with it. When Deianira realized what she had done, she took her own life. And Hercules, his body in ruins, knew that his end was near. He climbed Mount Oida, where he ordered his companions to build a funeral pyre. But no one dared to light it, until a shepherd named Philoctetes stepped forward, in exchange for the hero's bow. The flames rose like the tongues of the gods, and while he burned, lightning crossed the sky. Zeus watched from Olympus, not as a father, but as a judge. And then he broke the pact. He did not allow his son to be reduced to ashes. The mortal body was consumed, but the soul of Hercules was lifted among the clouds. There, among the gods, he finally found rest, and he was received by Hera, not with resentment, but with acceptance. The time of their enmity had ended. In time, he was joined in marriage with Hebe, goddess of eternal youth, as a symbol of his rebirth. He was no longer only the hero who had suffered, but the divine being who had transcended pain. And the pain was finally left behind. For centuries, his story has been told as a list of feats, but Hercules was more than strength or victory. He was pain, loss, punishment. A man hunted from the cradle by the will of the gods. A hero who never asked to be one, who carried crimes he did not fully understand and redemptions that never seemed enough. His labors were penance, but also transformation. Because every beast, every trial, every journey pulled him further away from his humanity and pushed him closer to the divine. And yet, in the end, he did not ascend as a conqueror, but as a broken soul that had endured more than anyone should. Today, we remember him as a legend, but behind the myth, there was a man who lost everything to become a symbol for all. If this story made you see Hercules with new eyes, don't forget to leave a like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing back the legends that shape the world. Until the next legend.